Welcome to today's deep dive. You know, usually when we picture monumental historical shifts or like massive resistance movements, we imagine these sprawling crowds.
Oh, absolutely. Like millions of people marching in the streets holding signs.
Right, physically shaking the very foundations of the Capitol. We tend to think on this massive macroscopic scale, but today we're kind of flipping that completely upside down.
Yeah, we really are.
We're going to look at how the battleground for immense political and social change can actually be shrunk down to a single tiny room. Specifically, we're exploring how a rural barbershop can become this massive symbol for resisting both systemic patriarchy and a national dictatorship.
It's a remarkable shrinking of scale, and it actually magnifies the stakes. We're looking at how the smallest, most ordinary spaces become highly charged, incredibly dangerous political arenas.
And to do that, we're unpacking a dense but honestly utterly fascinating academic analysis of Joan Robles Lana's 2013 film, Barber's Tales. Now, the film is set against a very specific real-world backdrop, which is the Marcos-era martial law in the Philippines. And just to be clear right up front, because we are dealing with deeply polarizing, highly charged historical events here.
Right. Very sensitive history.
Exactly. We are exploring this paper to understand the film's cinematic mechanics and the historical lens the author applies. As hosts, we aren't taking any political sides here. We are simply imparting the analysis and conveying the ideas contained in the original text, not necessarily endorsing them.
Yeah, we're just mapping out the theory.
Right. So, okay, let's unpack this. How does a simple pair of haircutting shears become a theoretical weapon against authoritarianism? Because, I mean, on its face, a pair of scissors is just a tool.
Well, to understand the weapon, you first have to understand the battlefield. You have to grasp the intense historical claustrophobia of the 1970s Philippines.
Okay, set the scene for us.
So we're looking at the closing years of Ferdinand Marcos's authoritarian regime. Specifically, the era of martial law that was declared in 1972 via Presidential Proclamation number 1081. And this wasn't just a political pivot. It was the construction of an architecture of total control.
Because the writ of habeas corpus was completely suspended, right? Which means the very fabric of legal reality just shifted overnight.
Exactly.
You could be arrested without cause, held without trial, or, simply disappeared. You're looking at a suddenly muzzled free press and a military that's been weaponized directly against civilian dissent.
Yeah, it creates an atmosphere of constant suffocating surveillance. And the brilliance of the academic paper is how it highlights the film's use of this rural, isolated village as a compressed allegory for the entire Philippine nation.
Like a microcosm.
Right. The local mayor isn't just some corrupt small-town politician. He acts as a direct, terrifying proxy for the dictator himself, creating this really rigid, inescapable top-down power structure.
I was trying to visualize that vertical axis of power while reading, and the best analogy I could think of is a toxic corporate ladder from hell.
Well, that's a good way to put it.
Like, think of a company with a wildly abusive CEO. That cruelty never just stays in the boardroom, it trickles all the way down the pipe.
Yeah, the classic trickle-down toxicity.
Exactly. The VP gets yelled at, so the VP belittles the manager abuses the shift supervisor, and eventually the unpaid intern is getting screamed at for using the wrong font on a memo.
That is painfully accurate.
Right. So in the world of this film, that vertical axis starts with the dictator at the very top. He pressures the mayor wields that power over the husband, and the husband completely brutally subjugates the wife. But how does the film manage to scale down such massive national trauma into a single room?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, this dynamic perfectly illustrates a concept from the French philosopher Michel Foucault.
Okay.
He calls it biopower. Biopower is essentially the idea that the state unjustly claims the ultimate right to administer, discipline, and even dispose of the physical bodies of its citizens.
That sounds incredibly dehumanizing.
It is. The state doesn't see people. It sees inventory. It treats human bodies as resources to be managed, extracted, or just eliminated if they become a problem.
So a dictatorship is essentially auditing the physical bodies of its population?
Precisely. And what this paper brilliantly argues is that this massive state-level biopower perfectly mirrors how patriarchy controls women's bodies at the domestic level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the dictator controls the citizen's body exactly the way the patriarchal husband controls the wife's body.
That is a staggering connection. So the violence isn't just an abstract concept on the evening news. It's intimate, it's personal, it's happening right in the living room, or, in this case, the local barbershop. And the paper notes this relies on deeply entrenched patron-client relationships that go back centuries, even predating Spanish colonialism in the Philippines. So it's a quotidian, everyday reality woven right into the fabric of the community.
Which creates a massive structural problem for the people living under it. Think about it. If the state and the patriarchy control absolutely everything that is visible in the public light, how do the powerless actually fight back?
Because you can't exactly stage a protest in the town square.
No, absolutely not. And you certainly can't write a dissenting op-ed in the local paper.
Right, so your rebellion has to go completely underground. You have to take the fight into the shadows. And ironically, the weapon of choice becomes speech.
Yes, but not public speech. We're talking about a concept that political scientist James C. Scott calls the hidden transcript.
The hidden transcript, okay.
Right. When people are utterly powerless, they physically cannot speak truth to power to its face without risking their lives. So they create this hidden transcript. It's a discourse, a language, a shared reality that happens entirely off stage, safely away from the ears of the oppressors.
Okay, but I have to push back a little bit here. In the context of the Philippines, and this film specifically, the paper says that hidden transcript takes the form of kuwentong barbero, literally barbershop gossip or tall tales.
Yes, kuwentong barbero.
But, usually we view gossip as petty, right? It's trivial, sometimes even destructive. It's just rumors. How does a barbershop rumor mill actually fight a heavily armed dictatorship?
I know, it sounds crazy until you look at it as a survival network. Think about a private employee group chat at a highly toxic company.
Oh man, I've been in a few of those.
Right. Management thinks everything is perfectly fine because everyone is smiling in the meetings. But in the Slack channel or the WhatsApp group without the boss, the workers are secretly venting, sharing crucial information, warning each other about who is getting fired next.
They're building a shadow map of reality.
Exactly. When you have no other public voice, rumor becomes resistance. It becomes the marginalized person's only available counter-discourse. The barbershop transforms into a counter-public sphere.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's a space where people can finally articulate the dangerous truths the regime absolutely won't allow in the daylight.
But wait, a barbershop is traditionally a fiercely guarded male space. It's where the men go to trade those tall tales. For this space to become a site of female political consciousness, someone has to physically cross a massive gender divide and claim that territory.
And that requires a catalyst. In this story, the catalyst is the protagonist, Marilu, who is played with incredible depth by Eugene Domingo.
She's a widow who takes up her dead husband's trade, right? And barbering is heavily coded as a masculine job.
It is. And the paper points out that the way the camera captures her doing this job is crucial. Classic film theory often talks about the male gaze.
Right, Laura Mulvey's theory.
Exactly. The idea that the camera usually positions women as passive spectacles designed purely for male desire. The woman is something to be looked at. She rarely drives the action herself.
Here's where it gets really interesting. The analysis shows how Marilu completely dismantles that expectation. The camera doesn't frame her as a spectacle or an object of desire.
Not at all. Her body is framed entirely as an agent of labor. She is defined by her absolute precision, by the physical, grueling work of cutting hair. It's a defiant reappropriation of professional space.
And that introduces an oppositional gaze. The film systematically forces you, the viewer, to look critically at how patriarchy disciplines women. And it does this through a really harsh taxonomy of supporting characters in the village.
Let's break that taxonomy down because it's heartbreakingly specific. First, you have the widow, Marilu, who desperately needs her dead husband's name just to have an ounce of social standing.
Because under biopower, without a man to attach herself to, the system literally cannot categorize her. She is a glitch in the patriarchal matrix.
Wow, a glitch.
Yeah.
Then you have the barren wife. She's treated as a decorative object and rendered completely socially null.
Again, biopower. If a woman's societal value is based entirely on her reproductive output for the state or the family line, being barren makes her structurally useless in the eyes of the regime.
Because she isn't producing the required inventory.
Exactly. Her body isn't serving the state's purpose.
Which leads right into the third category, the housewife. She is reduced essentially to a broodmare. Her body is entirely commandeered for reproduction.
She has zero agency over her physical self.
Yeah.
She exists solely to populate the next generation of laborers or soldiers.
And finally, you have the prostitute, whose body is treated as outright fungible property, bought, sold, traded, discarded. But what's terrifying about all of this is that the film doesn't give us a single cartoonish villain.
Right, there isn't one mustache-twirling bad guy orchestrating this oppression.
Yeah, the misogyny is entirely atmospheric. It's in the air they breathe. It is embedded in the very language they use to assign social roles. You don't need a cartoon villain when the entire architecture of society is designed to crush you.
So true.
So in an atmosphere that's suffocating, how does Marilu physically embody resistance without turning into, like, a typical Hollywood action hero? Because she's not out there throwing punches or doing martial arts.
She fights back through absolute restraint. The paper describes her performance as deliberately anti-spectacular. It's incredibly interior.
What does that mean exactly in the context of Filipino cinema?
Well, in a lot of Filipino melodrama, there's an expectation of emotional excess. Weeping, shouting, huge dramatic displays of suffering. Marilu fundamentally refuses to provide that spectacle.
Her silence is so intense, and it's not passive at all. I kept thinking of a bomb disposal expert.
That's a brilliant comparison.
When someone is diffusing a live explosive, they aren't yelling, they aren't throwing things around. They are hyper-focused, dead quiet, and making micromillimeter cuts with absolute terrifying mastery. Marilu has that exact same demeanor. She has total mastery over the blade.
And by maintaining that demeanor, she executes what feminist theorist Sarah Ahmed calls a feminist snap.
A feminist snap.
Yes, it's a withdrawal of consent from a social order that demands a woman's cheerful compliance. She stops performing the emotional labor expected of her. She just stops.
Wow.
And by picking up the shears and doing a man's job with such cold, undeniable precision, she proves that the masculine designation of barbering is completely arbitrary. It's a made-up rule. And she is casually, quietly breaking it.
If you're listening to this and thinking, well, it's just a movie about a haircut, you have to remember what silence means when you live in a place where speaking out gets you disappeared. In a dictatorship, silence is a very loaded survival tactic.
What's fascinating here is that her silence is incredibly dense with unspoken terror. Under martial law, speech literally invites punishment.
Right.
So the silence in the film is an empty space. It is heavy with everything that cannot be safely said out loud. Marilu's silence becomes the silence of the village itself, a community that has learned to communicate through indirection, through micro-expressions, glances, and through the shadows of the Kwintong Barbero.
Which brings us to how the physical environment around her has to match that suffocating tension. The director doesn't just rely on Eugene Domingo's incredible acting to carry this weight. The mise en scène, the lighting, the framing, the props, it's all screaming resistance.
Oh, absolutely. Every frame is deliberate.
The paper notes that the barber shears act as the film's central motif. They aren't just props lying on a counter. They are tools of labor, they are symbols of Marilu's newfound agency, and crucially, they are latent instruments of violence.
Yeah, that latent violence is palpable.
Think about it. She is holding razor-sharp blades right against the jugulars of the men in power while she shaves them. It's basically a hostage situation disguised as a haircut.
It creates an incredibly tense, coiled atmosphere. And the director pairs that latent violence with the rural setting itself. The physical, geographical isolation of the village directly mirrors the political isolation of authoritarianism.
Because dictatorships thrive in the dark, essentially.
Exactly. They thrive when communities are cut off from broader networks of communication and resistance. You see these empty dirt roads and dim, claustrophobic interiors, and it physically manifests that disconnection from the rest of the world.
So what does this all mean for the viewer actually sitting in the dark watching this unfold? The slow pacing, the static camera shots, the static shot, it creates this feeling of suspended fear. It almost feels like a horror movie or a slow burn thriller.
Yes, very much so.
But the monster isn't a ghost hiding in the closet. The monster is the government. It's the constant looming threat of the state stepping through your front door at any moment.
This raises an important question about what the author calls moral geography, and the director maps this out entirely using light. The film uses a lot of chiaroscuro.
Right, that stark dramatic contrast between deep shadows and bright light.
Exactly. Inside the barbershop, the lighting is warm, amber-toned. It creates a space that feels momentarily protected, like a precarious bubble of female solidarity.
The second you look outside that door,
The exterior, the street, the mayor's domain, it is harshly brutally lit. It is utterly exposed. That harsh light represents state violence and masculine privilege. Intimate, shadowed spaces are the only places where people can find a shred of safety when the public spaces are entirely corrupted by power.
But the analysis is careful to note that the film doesn't romanticize the barbershop either. It's not some magical, impenetrable safe haven. It is highly precarious.
Right, it's fragile.
At any given moment, that harsh light from outside can violently intrude. The safety is an illusion they are desperately, exhaustingly trying to maintain.
It is an ongoing daily labor to keep that darkness protective rather than oppressive. And that ongoing struggle is perfectly reflected in the film's deliberately ambiguous ending.
The ending. Yeah, the film refuses to tie everything up with a neat little bow. We don't get a definitive, satisfying answer about Marilee's ultimate fate. Did she escape? Was she caught?
We don't know.
Instead, her fate becomes a rumor. She herself becomes a Kuantong Barbero.
Which is structurally brilliant, because the overarching logic of the film is that meaning is ever fixed, and authoritarian power never actually gets the final word. By turning Marilee into a legend, a whispered ghost story among the villagers, she escapes containment entirely.
The regime can't arrest a rumor.
Exactly. The stories that communities tell about rebellious women will always outlast the patriarchal attempts to control or erase them.
The story outlives the dictator. That is incredibly powerful. And it really makes you think about why we are sitting here right now analyzing an academic breakdown of a 2013 Filipino film. Why does this matter to you, listening right now, perhaps on your commute or while making dinner?
It's a great question.
I think it's because it fundamentally redefines what resistance looks like. We are constantly taught that to change the world, you have to be loud, you need a microphone, you need a massive digital platform, you need 1 million people marching behind you in the streets.
But that's not the only way.
Right. This deep dive reminds us that sometimes resistance is incredibly quiet. Sometimes resistance is simply occupying a space you have been explicitly told you do not belong in, picking up the tools of that space and doing the work with absolute, unshakable precision.
That is the quiet withdrawal of compliance. It's the realization that the rules telling you where you belong or what you are capable of are completely arbitrary.
Right.
And once you recognize that those rules are made up, they instantly lose their power over you.
The shears are just scissors lying on a counter until someone who isn't supposed to hold them picks them up. Then they are a revolution.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today. Think about the spaces in your own life or in your own industry. What are the rooms, the boardrooms, the digital platforms that are strictly coded for certain types of people? The places where the harsh light of privilege dictates who gets to speak and who is expected to remain silent? Now imagine if someone completely unexpected were to quietly walk into that room, refuse to perform the emotional labor expected of them, and simply take over the shears of that space. How quickly would the power dynamic shift? And more importantly, who holds the shears in your world right now? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.